Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for Scorpio season, my talk about Scorpio season. A few days late, like last month. I apologise for that. I have been working on it for the last few days. I had a workshop on the weekend that took up a lot of time and energy that I would have spent on this talk. But yeah, the last few days I've been working hard on this presentation to share, and then I realized this morning that it's time to just go ahead and share what I've got. And I was getting really intense about it, which made me laugh because it fits Scorpio, doesn't it? So again, in line with the trend of sharing the series of Keoleonis zodiac paintings, here is the beautiful Scorpio one, and I love those pencil pines and the beautiful tower with the Scorpio sun beneath, hidden. Speaking of hidden, I think I'll stop my video and get going. Sorry if you can hear that aeroplane background noise. Okay, so Libra season, I don't think I actually mentioned perhaps the most important thing about Libra season, in fact, for this year at least, is that it was the third quarter square to the big Capricorn moment in January. So as the sun came through Libra to square Capricorn, it was sort of like, I did have the aspects, but I didn't speak to those. So I apologize for that. But here we are in Scorpio season and times continuing to unfold. And we are now in the Libra lunar cycle and the Mars-Pluto solar cycle at the point of this year in which they overlap. So the sun's ingress into Scorpio was on the 23rd of October, and the sun immediately applied to conjoin Juno and to oppose Uranus. And Mercury's inferior conjunction with the sun, or the cazimi, was on the 26th of October, a couple of days ago. That was the retrograde midpoint for this Mercury retrograde in Scorpio Libra. We find Mars in a love sandwich between Black Moon Lilith and Eris, and Venus is separating from the mutable cross, or has separated, I should say, from the mutable cross now. And the moon at the time of the ingress was waxing in Capricorn and is now in Pisces. So we're heading quickly towards the full moon on the weekend. Vesta moved into Virgo at very close to the sun's ingress into Scorpio. And this morning, an interesting thing that I got up and I was reading a Peter Kingsley book, and it talked about justice. And then I went on some kind of weird loop, like I do when some kind of idea comes to me, and I just look at like different asteroids and things. Anyway, I came across the asteroid Nemesis being at 0 Scorpio conjunct Mercury retrograde overnight and this morning, which I thought was interesting given what we're kind of looking at in the astrology this year, and how things with Eris and Eris being square to Pluto, and all of the Capricorn things going on and all of the Aries things going on, and how Nemesis, as the goddess of retribution, who sort of brought a kind of recalibration when it was felt that Themis's laws hadn't been followed, you know, the justice was not being done, and so Nemesis was the one to sort of enact the retribution. So here's one of many paintings by Monet, Houses of Parliament, done in 1904. Monet had the Sun and Jupiter in Scorpio, and I just wanted to begin with the kind of poignancy of where we're at. The world as we know it, or as we have known it, is ending, and this kind of painting made me feel a bit emotional in that sense of how we are really looking at the end of perhaps things like, well, hopefully we're not looking at the end of things like democracy and kind of justice and all that, but it sure does feel like it sometimes. Yeah, it really feels like a real battle in some ways. Even I don't even know if it's too dramatic. It's the season for drama, Scorpio season, so I'll just say it, like a battle between good and evil in a way. And I don't want to point to anyone in particular as evil, but and that sort of brings me to this slide, which we've sort of been seeing the increasingly intense division and polarization, with the mutable cross involving the nodes and Neptune and the personal planets crossing through Virgo. And it made me think recently about enantiodromia, the Jungian kind of idea where things seem to be becoming their opposites, where in a political sense it's sort of like, I'm sure I could get shot down for saying this, but it's sort of like the left is becoming the right and the right is becoming the left. And all of a sudden it's the right who are the conspiracy theorists and the left who refuse to look at any different information other than mainstream media. I don't know. I really am not a full bottle on politics in any way. And I sort of tend to not look at it too much at all, but it certainly is unavoidable what's obviously going on in the world at the moment, and getting kind of more heated as we come towards the actual US election day, and looking at what may unfold there in the coming weeks and months. So yeah, and the enemy stance that's sort of being taken in that polarization, so looking, we sort of seem to be quite unable to look at the opposite perspective without getting really defensive and sort of starting to blame and point the finger. And it's like that we position ourselves as good and our, you know, opposite as evil kind of mentality, which is pretty scary really. But I keep the faith that there's something coming through all of this time, and you know, the astrology obviously reflects all of that. Of course, our capacity for free will, Mars in Aries, has a lot to do with it and how it will all unfold. But when I look at the symbols, when I look at the astrology, I can't help but feel hopeful. And we'll talk a little bit more about my reasons for that. But coming back to where we are now, how do we know the truth? It's kind of a joke. A full moon conjunct Uranus. This painting is a close-up, or this image, I should say, is a close-up of Hilma af Klint's The Swan No. 17, which is a beautiful, complete painting, but I just loved this little detail right in the centre of it. I want to talk a little bit about Hilma af Klint as well in a few slides' time, briefly. Okay, so the full moon on Halloween, of course, on the weekend at 8 or the 9th degree of Taurus, and of course is the moon will conjoin Uranus. I've actually forgotten to put my degrees in. I usually leave that till the end to just insert all of those, but I obviously forgot to do that. I'm sorry. So of course the Sun applies to conjoin Juno in Scorpio at the same time and to oppose Uranus. So that opposition between the Sun and Uranus are almost exact, which of course points to the midpoint of Uranus retrograde. That will see us into 2021 in its completion. So, and as well, the moon is square to Hygeia in Leo, which offers a little hope somehow, although a little friction, of course, of dynamism, another point to make way for, make room for, allow for. And as well, another beautiful thing that I really just wanted to point to, because if you've been watching these videos I've been making throughout this zodiacal year, I began with Aries, and I think it might have been my first or second talk. I think I shared an encounter I had with a spider, which landed in my hand in the middle of the night in the pitch black. And anyway, long story short, led me to look at where Arachne was in the astrology of this year. And at the time, it was actually my Arachne was applying to my Sun when that encounter occurred. Now Arachne is around 6 Libra, or coming to, and will be by the full moon, and Venus will be applying to Arachne at that point of the full moon. So, and Venus, of course, being the ruler of Taurus. So I just wanted to point to that. And Venus will as well be opposite to Chiron. So just looking for ways to relate to the astrology in these small, nuanced kind of ways. Arachne makes me think about the web of life and the threads with which we're weaving. And this being the end of the world as we know it. And Michael Meade talks about the end being not one end as in the finale, but the ends that we must use in pick up, pull upon, pull our thread and begin weaving with it. So I just love that kind of image and wanted to include Arachne here again. And of course, she is related mythologically to Pallas Athena, and she is huge in the astrology of Scorpio season in my mind. And in the astrology of 2020, of course. It's been remarkable for me to, I've got Pallas Athena conjunct my Sun, so I always keep an eye on her anyway, but it's just been powerful having her presence through Capricorn throughout 2020, I feel. Mercury retrograde, of course, is pretty much now square Saturn, having just entered retrograded back into Libra this morning, and also will apply to oppose Eris retrograde again, although that will not complete that opposition, as Mercury will station direct before coming to completion of those. So, and I just also wanted to mention that the new moon, the Taurus new moon in April, was of course conjunct Uranus. But as well, this is one of my reasons for hoping, was also conjunct the minor asteroid Themis. And Themis is, of course, the goddess of justice and law and order and sort of social conduct. She sort of had a lot to do, linking her to Eris. She had to do with the guest list, the preparation of the guest list of the wedding, which Eris was excluded from. I believe it was Themis and Chiron who came up with the guest list for the wedding of Peleus and the sea nymph. Now her name, Thetis, forgive me. And so they chose to exclude Eris from that very important wedding. And of course, that was the beginning of the Eris turned up uninvited, as of course would the goddess of discord, disgruntled, and cast the golden apple at the feet of the goddesses marked to the fairest. And the rest, of course, is history, as Jupiter or Zeus gave the delegated the job to poor Paris, who was, of course, the Prince of Troy, and made his decision based on perhaps hormones, as young men are wont to do. And then the Trojan War ensued after he decided to take up Aphrodite, or Venus's, offer of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta, who was already married. And yeah, so the rest is history, of course. So little bit of mythological background there, but in terms of what it might mean, well, we may see under the light of this full moon unexpected revelations. That's no real prediction given its proximity to Uranus, but as well linking back to that new moon and the presence of Themis there, it makes me think about how things could really come to light in relation to themes of justice and retribution, given Nemesis co-presence in Scorpio as well. Recent ingress into Scorpio too. Okay. I wanted to include a few quotes from William Shakespeare, who there are a couple of charts available for William Shakespeare, and the one that I've gone with is his baptism, which occurred beneath a Scorpio full moon, and William Shakespeare had the sun in Taurus. And of course, perhaps the greatest writer, playwright of all time, these quotes come from him. Now is the winter of our discontent. He wrote that a long time ago. I think we could argue with him about that. No, I'm not taking away from his subjective experience. Okay, all that glitters is not gold. Have we learned that yet? Have more than thou showest, speak less than thou knowest, lend less than thou owest. This wonderful Taurian wisdom. Self-love, my liege, is not so foul a sin as self-neglecting. Our doubts are traitors, and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. And hell is empty, and all the devils are here. I think that could well be true currently. And of course, the seminal, most beautiful words of wisdom that I try to live by: to thine own self be true. So Mercury stations direct on the 3rd of November at almost 26 degrees of Libra, or just past 26 degrees of Libra, having just dipped its toe back into 25 Libra. So it will be square Saturn, within a very close orb of being square to Saturn at that time. And it sort of harkens back to the emergence of Mercury coming into its shadow zone of the retrograde at around the 23rd of September. So the station retrograde occurs closely opposite to Eris, and more widely opposite to Mars, still retrograde, and also trine to the North Node and sextile to the South Node. Venus in Libra, of course, ruling over this part of the retrograde, is trine to the Moon in Gemini at the station direct and applying to the North Node. So that's another reason that I'm hopeful and yes, poised for insight and downloads around the time that Mercury becomes visible in coming days in the morning sky as the morning star again ahead of the dawn. Mercury returns to Scorpio on Remembrance Day. Having just today returned, as I said, to Libra, it will return back to Scorpio on Remembrance Day as the sun separates from the conjunction with Juno. And so I have shared this beautiful painting again by Monet, Field of Poppies. Mercury stationing direct gives us an opportunity to reflect on the past few weeks. Are we committed to the same things we were at the end of September? And how have things changed? Ceres direct returns to Pisces on the 9th of November. This may be my favourite Monet. It's a bit of a dodgy reproduction, but it's called The Magpie. And the magpie's there. Here is another beautiful image painting, I should say, called The Dove #1 from Hilma af Klint. And so now is a good time to just mention her. She was an incredible painter or artist, well employed with her sort of paid day job, painting, I believe, landscapes and sort of portraits, still lifes. I think portraits more like, and and still lifes. And she sort of became like into spiritualism and theosophy, and began producing incredible sort of abstract modern pieces like this one. There was an exhibition of her work shown at the Guggenheim a year or so ago, and the book for that is available. It's called Paintings for the Future, and she is sort of being celebrated anew as the release of a film about her, and now it escapes me. I can't believe I didn't write it down to share. So there's a new film about her, a documentary been made and just been released in the last couple of weeks. I cannot find a release date for Australia, and I can't seem to buy it, so I haven't actually seen it yet. It's not available through Amazon or anything else in Australia that I can find, unfortunately, yet, but certainly available in the US and Europe. And I think it looks really interesting in that it's sort of pointing to her being like the mother of this kind of modern art, being compared to Kandinsky and Mondrian, who have been always called the fathers of that movement, the art movement. But this image, I mean, there's just so many. It was really hard to choose, like to not put all of her beautiful paintings in because they're incredible. And I spoke to an art professor who saw this show at the Guggenheim, and he was telling me how the paint is so thin on the canvas, so it's like translucent. It's like they're really big, a lot of her paintings, and yes, very thinly applied paint that gives it like this spiritual kind of dimension. And this painting was created in 1915. Sorry, I'm not giving an art lecture. I don't mean to do this, but I just feel like it's relevant in some bizarre, abstract way. I just want to point to this double helix and this spiral at the center of this, because there was no awareness of like the DNA double helix or anything else at the time that this painting was made. And yeah, I just think she was incredibly attuned to something amazing, and I just applaud her so much. I think she did some beautiful art, and she didn't want for it to be shared until 20 years after her death, I think, in her home country of Sweden. But it was not to be shown outside of her country for 40 years, I believe. I haven't actually found that information in the book yet, but I believe that's correct. And she wrote instructions for it to be shown, and she sketched and described a building for her exhibition to be held with the white spiral like the Guggenheim has. So she sort of had that premonition of and directed that her works be shown, exhibited in that particular building. So I think all of that is detailed in the film. If you haven't seen it or heard about it, it's I think it would be really worth finding it. Anyway, so back to astrology. Venus moves from 24 Virgo through Libra and into Scorpio throughout this Scorpio season. Has already passed its quincunx with Eris, trine all the Capricorn Eucopia goings on, that cycle that of course began in December 2019. The exact trine to Saturn on the 24th of October has passed now. Continues to separate and unfold, and the midnight Mars retrograde opposition. So Mars, where I live in Western Australia, this will actually be at midnight. So I've got the date there as the 9th to 10th because it is, I believe it's at 11:59 p.m. on the 9th that this is precisely exact Mars retrograde opposite to Venus in Libra. So that's really amazing. And the Venus in Libra opposition to Eris on the 16th of November as well. Here's Björk, one of my heroes. This lyric comes from her song The Gate. My healed chest wound transformed into a gate where I receive love from, where I give love from. Björk had Sun, Neptune, Moon rising in Scorpio, though I'm not sure that the birth time is accurate, but seems to fit to me. I think it's a rectified chart on astro.com. So, and the image comes from, the photo is taken by Jane Brown in 95. So Venus in Libra ingresses Libra tomorrow and will apply to oppose Chiron retrograde, which is exact just ahead of the full moon on the 2nd of November. And that cycle began on the 10th of February where Venus conjoined Chiron in Aries. Venus will sextile Hygeia at 13 Leo, and that cycle began on the 4th of September, not too long ago. The moon will conjoin Venus at 19 Libra on the 13th of November, and that's a very important day indeed. And that will be the solar plexus chakra moon gate that I spoke about during my Libra talk. And a lot to do with that feeling into what's core for us. I've left a little squiggle there in order to try and elaborate on that, and it left my mind to return to that. So I haven't even looked at my own notes around that solar plexus chakra moon gate from the last couple of cycles. But yeah, feeling into that centrality of our being. Below, we've come, at the moment, we're still within the heart chakra moon gate. And as we come to this dark moon conjunction with Venus on the 13th of November, we'll shift into that solar plexus area. So dropping down and finding ways to release old ways of being that no longer serve us, to drop and let go of these parts of us that correlate to our solar plexus chakra, which I think is certainly an individual kind of experience. The third quarter square to Capricorn begins on the 16th of November following the new moon. The exact square to Pluto, oh, I haven't put the dates there. I think that's because they're all so close together, of course. So yeah, beginning on the 16th of November, the exact, yes, that's right. I remember how I wrote it now. Exact square to Pluto at 22:55, exact square to Jupiter, 23:25, and exact square to Pallas Athena, 23:52. And then the exact third quarter square to Saturn on the 19th of November, a couple of days later. This image, oh, I didn't write it. It's Venice. It's Claude Monet again, and I haven't actually put my footer in. I do apologise, but of course it's a fuzzy Venice by Claude Monet, and I love it. Mars, of course, will station retrograde on the 14th of November. So I probably should have, I've mixed up my slides a little bit there. I've just followed Mars from Venus, but I'm going to go back to the 13th of November in a minute. Of course, that happens at 15 degrees and 14 minutes of Aries, and Mars stationed retrograde at 28 degrees of Aries on the 10th of September. Aspects have been made by Mars to Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Pallas Athena, Eris, Black Moon, Lilith, and Mercury, and Venus, of course, bringing in that relational, so that actually I meant to include this in this slide as well, that Mars, the retrograde has coincided with the square to Venus and now the opposition to Venus, and adding, like, bringing in the relational component to the Mars retrograde. Of course, being in Aries, which is all about I am, and the self-oriented, and the opposition of Venus in Libra, in domicile, where she loves to be, and thinking about our significant others as we reflect upon what this Mars retrograde has meant for us all in a personal sense, not just in the mundane sense. So what has changed in terms of our desires, drives, and ambitions? That's all about me. And how has conflict, inner and outer conflict, changed us over the past weeks and months? And what have the past 2 months allowed or forced us to reflect upon as we've been up against it, pushing in one direction, being thwarted or frustrated, as the case may be, with the Saturn involvement and all the rest? Oh, the painting is the reflection in Lake Misaka in Kai Province from Hokusai, of course. And I think it's my favourite one of his, maybe. I love it. I love the reflection. And he had Mars Vesta in Scorpio, and he was also born close to the Eris-Pluto conjunction in Sagittarius, which I'm about to talk about. Once I touch on Cellini, who this incredible sculpture of Perseus with the head of Medusa, and he's actually standing on the body of Medusa, which is found in Florence in Italy. It's remarkable for its brutality, beauty, and integrity. And I actually didn't, again, I've forgotten my footer, so it would have been worth obsessing for a little bit longer, but I got freaked out by the timing and how we were almost a week into Scorpio season. But Cellini did have a very powerful Scorpio stellium, like I think at least 5 planets in Scorpio, many personal. So forgive me for not having those details there for you, but it's worth looking at Cellini's chart, because the story goes with this amazing sculpture was it's bronze, and at the time bronze had sort of gone out of fashion for sculpting, and nobody believed that Cellini would be able to create this piece in a bronze, in one complete piece, but supposedly he did, and it required that he burn his furniture in order to keep the fire, to make the bronze hot enough, and then adding pewter and cutlery and things like that into the mold as the fire was burning in order to keep, because as you can see, I mean, it's a bit hard to see on a two-dimensional image, but he is holding his arm holding the head of Medusa up higher than his shoulder height, sort of thing. Like the way that sculpture sort of defies gravity and defies logic, and it seems impossible, but he did have a patron who backed him despite not believing he'd be able to do it, and it is positioned in a very prominent place adjacent to Michelangelo's David. So yeah, it's really amazing. It's an incredible piece, and the sort of obsession with getting something right, Cellini, amazing. And it's brutal too. I mean, it's a heartbreaking piece. Okay, so this brings us to thinking about Medusa related to Pallas Athena and the Pallas Athena Jupiter Pluto conjunction, the third one for 2020. So the prior conjunctions in 2020, well, of these three for a long time, well, if ever, I mean, I haven't actually looked at if these three have ever conjoined in the past, but I do think about it in relation to Eris very much, in relation to the Pluto Eris cycle. So I'll share that chart at the beginning of that cycle in a moment, but just to point to the prior 2020 conjunctions. The first one was on the 5th of April, and it occurred Jupiter and Pluto at almost 25 degrees of Capricorn, and Pallas Athena almost at 26 degrees. So very close to that conjunction. And Eris was at almost 24 degrees of Aries. I've left off my Aries there. The retrograde conjunction, which was the second of three, was on the 30th of June, and Jupiter and Pluto were at 24 degrees of Capricorn. Pallas was at almost 25 degrees of Capricorn at that time, and square to Eris at 24.5 degrees of Aries, and Eris was direct at that time. So this third conjunction of the three of these planets, I should say, but also archetypally mythological figures, and also not to leave Saturn and Mars and the Moon out of this configuration as well, which I'll mention about the Moon in a sec again. But yeah, Saturn's close by at almost 27 degrees of Capricorn, and Mars is stationing direct on that same day, this 13th of November date. So yeah, widely involved in this configuration. Moon, Venus at 19 degrees of Libra at that moon gate again. Excuse me. So this, for anyone who happens to be in Western Australia like I am, it could be worth getting up early on that morning, because this conjunction occurs at precisely 4:36 a.m, which will be a beautiful time to witness that Moon-Venus conjunction ahead of the dawn, and to just pay homage to this remarkable event. So looking back on all of this, this cycle between Eris and Pluto was seeded in December of 1756 in Sagittarius, with this massive Sagittarian stellium. Jupiter, as ruler of Sagittarius, is found with Venus in Scorpio, and also Jupiter is in mutual reception with Mars. Mars is in Sagittarius there, in the heart of the Sun, Cazimi in Sag, and Jupiter in Mars' traditional home of Scorpio, nocturnal home of Scorpio. So yeah, another interesting point, that just as an aside, Saturn in this chart was at 7.5 degrees of Aquarius, and that's the same degree as where it will square Uranus in February. So that, I thought that was an interesting correlate, or side note. As well, just to point to, of course, the South Node now in Sagittarius is applying to this 18.5 degree mark of Sagittarius, and will come to 18 degrees and 32 minutes at the end of January in 2021 as Saturn applies to square Uranus. And that, just to mention that the Saturn-Uranus cycle began at 29, almost 0 degrees of Capricorn, just the final anaretic degree of Sag in February of 88. Just a little bit of context for all of this to reflect upon if you're so called. So nothing, of course, is by chance, but and Pallas Athena's presence in Capricorn throughout 2020 has been incredibly meaningful. And I've not been able to take my mind off it for very long at a time. It's sort of been really present for me. And they've been opposing, all of the stuff's sort of been widely opposing my Sun in Cancer, so it's been kind of personal for me in a way. But yeah, I just feel like there's going to be interesting things unfold. That's an understatement, isn't it? To look at what will unfold from 2020 and all the seeding of these new cycles of this year. So, but this being the third quarter square between Pluto and Eris, and how it involves Jupiter. And of course that links to, Pallas's father was Jupiter. She was born from the head of Zeus after he swallowed her mother, Metis. And Metis was not only a goddess, but a word, as in like a noun and a verb, perhaps. Cunning wisdom. She was very wise. And I feel like she is a lost part of Pallas Athena, and that a lot of what's going on, aside from all the massive, I shouldn't say aside from, because I think it's intertwined. It's sort of within what's going on in the sort of political and social, in the broader collective sense. There is this justice, wisdom approach that we need to remember about this, and looking at how this cycle will complete. So the conjunction of 1756, there were several squares around 1907, there were several oppositions around 1976, and now we are at the several waning squares 2019, 2020, 2021. Between Pluto and Eris, and then the cycle will complete and renew in 2115. So it's a while away. But what will we see? How will it end? How will this cycle complete? It will be very interesting to watch it unfold over the coming years, decades. But this is the first difficult aspect for which we have been conscious of Eris's planetary existence. So that's important too. And looking back just broadly, this Sagittarius cycle seems to correlate with issues around oppression and slavery. And the previous cycle that was renewed in 1756 seemed to correlate with the witch burnings. I'm still researching all of that, but just as a broad suggestion, if anybody's interested in that, it's quite it's compelling kind of looking at these things. So Eris has a dual nature. She is, of course, goddess of strife and shit stirrer extraordinaire, but her dual nature is one, to me, it feels like Empedocles' love and strife, the way, the dynamism that births the world. She was mother to many challenging children. And that's interesting too. But yeah, she's also to do. I think it's Hesiod talking about her competitive, that competition aspect of her. And I think Stephen Forrest relates to her a lot in that way, which I like. I see that too, that as we sort of see what others are doing, we can become more creative, and it spurs us on in a way to great things, which may be another way to relate to Eris in our charts. And Pallas Athena's archetypal reunification with her lost parts. That to me is a big part of her presence in Capricorn through 2020. Medusa and Metis being, of course, her lost parts. I didn't mention that Medusa is, of course, on her Aegis, and Medusa, she turned Medusa into the Gorgon, and then she sent Perseus to kill her. Well, she didn't send Perseus to kill her, but she aided Perseus in killing her, and so did Mercury. So that was a sad kind of separation. But perhaps in some ways, and this is what's interesting to me about Pallas Athena and Metis, who has this kind of prophetic knowing, and Medusa, who's like a dark aspect of the feminine. There's like so much unknown that we can't possibly know, but Pallas, in her wisdom, sort of acts from a faithful kind of place inside of her. And even though people may never understand her actions, she does what needs to be done. And so I think about that in relation to what we're looking at in 2020 now, and as we're reflecting on things around like oppression and slavery, and you know, the polarizing division that's going on in the world, and based on the color of our skin and things like that, our biological sex and all those kinds of things. The divisive thing that's going on is really potent now, and if we can sort of tap into this Pallas part to reimagine like the feminine wholeness in relation to Metis and Medusa, in relation to that Pallas made this decision to go with Orestes' innocence, which many have criticised and still criticise as her betrayal of the feminine. But I don't think it was quite that simple somehow. Or maybe it was a very considered, difficult, but important decision that needed to be made. And we're sort of seeing how that unfolds now, which leads to this kind of point of healing the wounds and understanding the painful necessity, with a capital N, as in the goddess necessity, of things as they have been. And all that, I mean, that's a very difficult thing to approach, because so much suffering continues and has been done to people. There's been a lot of injustice done. How will it all end? Well, we'll see, won't we? Or maybe we won't in this incarnation, but... So the Scorpio new moon on the 15th of November at 23 degrees of Scorpio, separating from Juno, a new lunar cycle ahead of the Sagittarian solar cycle. I think it's a good time to reflect upon what Scorpio calls us to, which of course is depth and intensity, complexity, psychology, all those kinds of things, as well as like sex and death and taboo. And to me, reflecting on this, I was struck by the idea that it's death that gives us meaning. It's death that leads us into Sagittarius, you know, into making life meaningful. Life would cease to be meaningful if it went on forever. There'd be no reason to find meaning in it if it was... Anyway, I'm talking a lot, aren't I? Waxing lyrical. So Mars is stationary at this point, but direct. The sextile to Pallas I jumped over, and Jupiter, and as well, more widely, Saturn and Pluto, and the quincunx to Eris retrograde. Yes, it's a very potent new moon. The trine to Hygeia, Mars being trine to Hygeia in Leo, and applying to harmonious aspects with the lunar nodes, adding another dose of hope to the situation, and Venus applying to oppose Eris retrograde and being square to Pluto as well. This amazing Scorpio rising human being, Mars Sun conjunction in Aries and Pluto in Cancer, Venus Saturn North Node in Aquarius, Moon in Leo, square series in Taurus, glorious dynam. I loved this quote. The future depends entirely on what each of us does every day. A movement is only people moving. And as we move into this great conjunction in Aquarius and the age of Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius in a few years, Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius at the solstice very soon, and you know, all the others as well coming through it. Yeah, it's good advice off the back of a Scorpio new moon. So the last week of the Sun in Scorpio, Sun sextile Pluto in Capricorn on the 5th of November, Sun sextile Pallas Athena in Capricorn again on the 15th of November, Venus in Libra opposing Eris on the 16th of November, and square to Capricorn Eucopia and Pallas Athena and Jupiter in particular at the same time. And Juno being trine to Neptune. Oh, I've left that date off. I've made a few mistakes. I'm sorry for that. But that's at around 18 degrees of Neptune being retrograde at 18 degrees. So Juno will be at 18 Scorpio at that point. And it must be around this mid-month, 16th, 17th of November, since I've put it in that spot. Mercury's third opposition to Uranus on the 17th of November. Uranus being retrograde and Mercury being direct by that point, and preparing to come out of shadow. Sun sextile to Saturn on the 19th of November. Mercury's emergence from shadow on the 20th of November, looking back to the 23rd of September for those mercurial messages and insights at that point. And the Sun's ingress into Sagittarius on the 22nd of November. This long quote from A Separate Reality by Carlos Castaneda. I've shared it once before, but I was going to read it and I didn't. And I always regretted not doing that. And I think that must have been at the Scorpio full moon in Taurus season, because it always brings this up for me. So this amazing painting from Scorpio new moon person, Georgia O'Keeffe. Her birth time is not 100% reliable, but the chart that I have seen has her Scorpio new moon conjunct Jupiter and Mercury retrograde rising in her chart. She did this painting called Cow's Skull, Red, White and Blue in 1931. Very Americana kind of image, kind of painting. Okay. Once you decided to come to Mexico, you should have put all your petty fears away, said Don Juan very sternly. Your decision to come should have vanquished them. You came because you wanted to come. That's the warrior's way. I have told you time and time again, the most effective way to live is as a warrior. Worry and think before you make any decision, but once you make it, be on your way, free from worries or thoughts. There will be a million other decisions still awaiting you. That's the warrior's way. I do believe that, Don Juan, at least some of the time. It's very hard to keep on reminding myself, though. A warrior thinks of his death when things become unclear. That's even harder, Don Juan. For most people, death is very vague and remote. We never think of it. Why not? Why should we? Very simple, he said, because the idea of death is the only thing that tempers our spirit. By the time we left Los Vidrios, pardon my pronunciation, It was so dark, that the jagged silhouette of the mountains had merged into the darkness of the sky. We drove in silence for more than an hour. I felt tired. There were headlights of a car on a hilltop in the distance behind us. They remained visible for a while, then they disappeared into the darkness as if they had been scooped away. After a moment, they appeared on another hilltop, and then they disappeared again. I followed their appearances and disappearances for a long time in the rearview mirror. At one point, it occurred to me that the car was gaining on us. It was definitely closing in. The lights were bigger and brighter. I deliberately stepped on the gas pedal. I had a sensation of uneasiness. Don Juan seemed to notice my concern, or perhaps he was only noticing that I was speeding up. He looked at me at first, then he turned around and looked at the distant headlights. "Those are the lights on the head of Death," he said softly. "Death puts them on like a hat and then shoots off at a gallop. Those are the lights of Death on the gallop, gaining on us, getting closer and closer." A chill ran up my back. After a while, I looked in the rearview mirror again, but the lights were not there anymore. I told Don Juan that the car must have stopped or turned off the road. He did not look back. He just stretched his arms and yawned. "No," he said, "Death never stops. Sometimes it just turns off its lights. That's all." Death by Scorpio leads us to meaning in Sagittarius. So I'll see you in Sag season, unless Death catches me first. I did that late last night. I was going to... Okay. Thank you all for joining me.